Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast with Mike and Mike. Sales is a thinking process. This podcast will help you learn about what works in sales, how to hone your skills, and increase your success. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry. Mike Connor and Mike Simmons, you're going to be delighted. We have another listener question this week. I know how much you enjoy that.
Oh, right on. What is it?
Well, Jennifer from Cincinnati says that she has reached her potential and she wants to know what tips do Mike and Mike have for finding my next sales job?
Well, I think that, Jennifer, that's a great question. I think a lot of people this time of year are sort of asking themselves that question. You end up, I think in the sales world, you go through a year and you kind of think about what is the upcoming year going to look like. And I think this is something that maybe a lot of us asked ourselves. Are we still on track? Is our job still challenging? Do we see a career path where we're advancing, and all those things kind of come into play? And it's funny this question came up because I've had a couple of people call me kind of out of the blue, just asking if I could be a reference for them. And so I think she's not alone in sort of this search for information. So great timing, great question. And I think the thing I would first say is that anytime you're looking for an opportunity, particularly as a salesperson, is I would treat the search for your next job just like you would search for your next customer, and essentially apply the same sales process that you use to find opportunity and qualify it and make sure that you're making the best use of your time, but also setting yourself up for success. I've actually used the same exact process when I was in that position and looking for a new job.
One of the other things that I kind of think about in this scenario is, what do I want to do? Like, what's my long-term plan? Am I interested? Is the reason that I'm looking for a new opportunity because the product that I'm working with isn't interesting, the industry that I'm working with isn't interesting, the market that I'm in is not interesting, the people who buy inside that market aren't interesting? And then beyond that, the other thing I start to look at is, from a career progression standpoint, where are some of my gaps? Are the gaps on a technology? Are the gaps on understanding the transactional nature of some sales processes? Are the gaps on finding a more strategic solution that I'm looking to sell into a market? And the better I understand what I'm trying to do, better I understand my goals, the easier it's going to be to begin that research process on finding the right company that I might be able to fit into, not only for what I'm trying to accomplish, but for the type of person they're looking for.
So back to Jennifer, I'll tell you a story about a guy that we know actually that just went through this process. Now, he would have been in this boat exactly a year ago and thinking about making a change. And this is somebody that had worked for me for several years. And he really had arrived at the conclusion that maybe it was time to move on. And we sat down and he asked a similar question. What is it that I want to do next? And he had set himself up to have the freedom to be able to be patient and to really look for the ideal job. And something I really learned from him, I mean, I've always known, common sense says, always put yourself in a position where you can go after opportunities where you have options, where you're not rushed into finding another job. And a lot of that, this will be another topic for another day, I think, but knowing that you have the financial security and the ability to do that really affords you a lot of opportunity. And I think at this point in my life, with 3 daughters that are either in college or getting married and grandkids, all that stuff, it hit me all at once. It's like, okay, right now isn't the time for me to just take a year off and find my next job. But one of the things that this gentleman did was, he, instead of bridging the gap of, well, I'm just going to do time at my current job while I look for another job, he said, no, I'm going to treat this like an opportunity and I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to take a leap of faith. And he had set himself up in a way where he knew he could take 3 or 4 months to really go through giving 100% of his mind share to finding the next opportunity. And that gave him that luxury. I probably couldn't do that at this point in my life, but I really admired the fact that he had set himself up. So I think the first thing would be, if you can do it, I know it's a courageous move and it's got some risk associated with it, but I could see a difference in his search when he could allocate 100% of his time to finding his next opportunity. And what was ironic about it was, finding another opportunity wasn't the issue. It was finding the right opportunity. And he passed on several because he knew, well, I can always get a job if I have to get a job, but he was confident in what he wanted to pursue and had the ability to do that. And I really admired sort of that approach.
Yeah. So he went through a qualification process, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So how does that qualification process, differ, or is it the same when you think about working on a customer opportunity?
Yeah, it really is the same, right? Because, well, it's not exactly the same. I mean, he wasn't calling people and asking a hiring manager if they had budget to hire him and what problem am I going to solve for you and all that stuff. But no, it was a similar in thinking in that he wanted to make sure that his interests were aligned with the company. He wanted to have an interest in whatever solution they were providing. He wanted a company that had a culture that was a good fit for the way he wants to work. He's a very ethical person, wanted a company that was known, a brand that had a good reputation. All these things kind of came into play. And then through, just like we research people on LinkedIn and things like that, when we want to call somebody and figure out how we can work together, it was the same thing. He looked up the managers that he would be working for. He looked at the kind of people that this company employed. He ultimately, without getting into a lot of detail, he really narrowed it down to a short list of 2 companies that he said he'd love to work for. And what he did was, just like you are when you're prospecting, he said, okay, if these are the 2 companies I'm going to go after, what do I know? What do I not know? How do I fill in those gaps? And what research do I do? And then who do I start contacting? Who do I network with? Who do I reach out to see what it's like to work in that company? And it goes well, well beyond just going on Glassdoor.com, reading a bunch of disgruntled reviews from people, but really doing the research and connecting with people that already work for those companies.
That whole, who do I know inside my network who can help me get in touch with someone I should know inside that organization? Or who do I know who actually is in the organization? Maybe they're not in the same role, maybe they are, but they can give some insight around culture, around how things work inside the organization. Then you start to gather that information. You compare notes on the other people relative to the other people that you're talking to, and you start to paint a better picture. Each of those conversations becomes another brushstroke in that painting as you determine, is this the right organization for me? Does the organization, on the outside, they may say X, Y, and Z, but do their people inside the organization reflect that same culture that you perceive is in the organization? And then also, how does their process work? So I think about, from a sales process, I think about what's their buying process. From an interviewing process, it's what's their interview process? What's their hiring process? How many levels do I need to go through in an organization? What is there an assessment that I've got to go through? Or is their approach a group interview approach? Do they post opportunities externally, or are most of the positions filled through referrals inside the organization? These are just some of the questions that come to mind for me.
Both of you now have talked about the gaps. Mike Simmons, you said at first to search for the gaps, or where are some of my gaps? So that actually brought to mind to me, well, what if Jennifer has reached her potential at her current job because of the gaps? But if you realize you have some gaps, what advice do you have for filling those? Or is it important to work on the gaps that you identify?
I'm going to steal a little bit of Mike's thunder here, because there's a quote. I'll butcher this and he'll correct me as we go through it. But basically, one of the things Mike likes to say is, do you have 20 years of sales experience, or do you have 4 years of sales experience repeated 5 times? And I think that's a pretty important question when you reflect upon your career. So first, Mike, did I hit the quote right?
Yeah, no, you did pretty good on that. That's
so as I go through that process, I think, what kind of customers have I had a chance to work with? So for me personally, when I first moved into a role where revenue was tied to my compensation, it was in an account consultant, a learning consultant role. I had a sales rep that I was working with. I was a customer facing rep, but I didn't really have the same quota carrying responsibility that the account executive who also worked on that team had. So that was a gap for me. Although I was compensated based on how successful we were as a team, I didn't have the burn of, I'm truly accountable for generating that revenue inside the customer base. So I identified that as an individual gap. So when I looked at opportunities for advancement, one path could have been moving into senior strategic level roles as a consultant, which I did in that organization. Another path could have been moving into an entry-level account executive role. Instead of moving into an entry-level account executive role, I took upward opportunities on the consulting side, honed my skills working with some larger companies, and then felt more comfortable transitioning into a full-fledged account executive role inside that organization. So for me, a gap was quota carrying. The gap was title. Those are some examples.
One other thought that I have is if you're like Jennifer and you're starting to look for your next job, but you still have a current sales position, where's that balance to make sure that you continue to do a great job where you're at? Because I imagine you don't want to go out on a bad note versus putting your effort into finding the new opportunity.
Really good question. Ultimately, as sales professionals, most of us are measured purely on our number. There may be some metrics related to number of meetings that we get, number of outreach or contacts that we make, depending on role. So you have a number, you're accountable to that number. Make sure you're doing the things that are necessary, not only to achieve the number in the short term, but continue to build out your personal pipeline, because you never know, you may not find that other opportunity. So in that scenario, I'd make sure I was acting based on the idea that I was still going to be in the company, but I'm creating options beyond that.
Yeah, because one of the things that came to mind for me was that, and I'm not just looking at this from the sales rep perspective, but as a sales leader, if Jennifer or whomever has decided, yeah, I need to make a change, that's going to happen, and you're willing to take a chance, I think another scenario is be open with the sales manager or your sales VP or whoever it is that you're working for and share that feedback and do it in a way that's productive to say, because I've had this happen on the receiving end of this where I've had sales reps that, quite frankly, I had little or no idea that they were unhappy or that they were contemplating leaving. And we would have a really productive conversation about what is it that was missing in the job? Where weren't they getting the satisfaction? Was it because it wasn't challenging? Did they just feel like they didn't have career progression? Was it a financial thing? And, it wasn't because they came to me and said, hey, I'm going to try and work you for a raise. But it was more about, hey, Mike, I'm just at a point right now where I feel like I'm not growing. And I think it's gotten to the point where I'm going to start looking for another opportunity. And just wanted to give you, be upfront about it, let you know that that's what I'm thinking about doing. And, in a couple of cases, we actually sat down and said, well, I didn't want to lose the person. They may or may not, they didn't really want to leave, but they wanted to find opportunity. And we were able to have really productive conversations about that. Now, a lot of that is going to depend on the relationship you have with your boss. It's going to really depend on how secure they are in their role, and are they going to be vindictive about it? I mean, all kinds of things can happen, because I could think of one former boss that if I had gone to that manager and said, hey, I'm thinking about looking at another opportunity, I wanted to give you a heads up. I don't want to just be that person that calls in sick every 3 days because I have an interview, but I wanted to be candid with you. I can think of one manager in particular probably would have booted me out of her office the second I said those words. But if you're going to make a change anyhow, maybe that's the thing that is the kick in the pants that'll get you out there and find that next opportunity. But having conversations, I think it doesn't just limit you to looking to the outside, but maybe there's something there that maybe you don't have to leave the company. Maybe there's something else you could be doing.
And there's an alternate approach to going in and saying, hey, I'm interviewing, I'm thinking about another opportunity, wanted to be transparent with you. The other approach could be just being direct and saying that you'd like an opportunity to expand the role inside the organization. Maybe you see a gap or a need inside the organization that you can address that will allow you to expand your responsibilities, expand your skill set, and solve a problem that's happening inside the organization. And in that case, it's less about I'm interviewing because my needs aren't being fed. In that situation, it's less about interviewing because my needs are not being met and more about having a conversation with that leader. Ideally, they're a good leader, that leader about ways that you want to grow and build your capabilities inside the organization.
Where did you say she was from, Jody?
Cincinnati.
We're all thinking about all these scenarios and stuff, but what if it's just like her husband got a reload to the Bay Area and she has to move to California. She just wants a few tips. And really, the only problem is she's got to move.
Yeah.
We've made a lot of assumptions about her situation, but hopefully people that are in other situations or what have you can think about really. I think the original conversation was around finding your next opportunity like you'd treat a sales opportunity. And one of the reasons why that was in my initial thought was because I see a lot of people that are in sales roles focus too much on the compensation. They focus too much on being sold to, actually. Sales leaders really painting this picture that this is going to be the thing that allows them to have financial freedom and buy a Tesla and all those other things. And they're really short-sighted about what's it going to be like to work in that company. And one of the things, because Mike and I work with a lot of different companies, we see very, very able-bodied, talented, smart salespeople struggling in a sales environment. And it really doesn't have as much to do with them individually as it does with the environment that they're sort of working in. And we see other people that they're not your top tier sales professional, but they are in a company that is doing very well, that's succeeding. In other words, what I'm getting at is you can set yourself up for success or failure based on that decision you make on where you go to work. So that's just, something I would keep in mind is put yourself in the position where you'll be on the best team that can help you not only achieve your short-term goals, but your long-term growth and not get stuck in a cycle of looking for a new opportunity every couple of years.
Be honest with yourself too. I mean, we went through an interview process a number of months back, and we had one person who wanted to know what the training plan was and how that was documented. And I had these visions of some kind of 3-ring binder with a lot of pages and some file separators that talk about first 90 days and product information and all of these other process related items. And those are things that we're building inside that customer. So if you need that support, that process in place, don't set your sights on a startup. If you're more interested in building and engaging and you don't have to have that same kind of stability, then maybe getting involved with someone who has a startup and has a new technology that they're delivering to market might be a good fit. But you've got to be honest with yourself about what you're looking to get out of it. And the employer wants to be honest too about, ideally, they should be honest about what they're looking to get out of an employee who's joining the team.
Well, this has been some great information for Jennifer, but also for any sales professional looking to find their next opportunity. Mike and Mike love answering your questions. This has been a fun addition to the show. We didn't do it for a while, but now we're taking in these listener questions and putting them right here on the air, which is a lot of fun. If you have a question you would like Mike and Mike to answer on the show, we would love to get it. Mike, where can they send a question?
I think the easiest way is to send it to hello@catalystsale.com. And that'll go directly to Mike and I. And if questions come in, we can share them with Jody and certainly incorporate them into the podcast.
Well, thank you, Mike and Mike. This has been great. Thank you, Jennifer, for your question. You can find out more about Catalyst Sale at catalystsale.com.